and I just focused on policy ambitions. And it just changed my focus in life from career to family. And now, look, I'm Speaker of the House. It wasn't necessarily planning this, but what's more important to me in my life is my family. And I believe I can be a great policymaker advocating for the beliefs and the ideals that I have without sacrificing my higher priority, which is just to have a good family life.
Well, happy Father's Day and welcome to AM Joy. To borrow a phrase from my colleague Rachel Maddow, watch what they do, not what they say. You just saw Paul Ryan's tribute to fathers and families. Ryan and many of his fellow Republicans, the party that used to lay claim to being the party of family values, are indeed, many of them, fathers and mothers and grandparents. And they say that they're opposed to the Trump administration's policy of separating migrant children from their parents.
Religious leaders have come out and said that this is inhumane. Do you agree?
We don't want kids to be separated from their parents.
I think this is a terrible situation I'd like to fix.
And yet, the immigration bill touted by the House GOP leadership, set to come to the floor this week, only so Paul Ryan can avoid an embarrassing discharge petition forced through by members of the House, doesn't even outlaw family separation. There is no language in the bill that clearly puts an end to the practice of tearing migrant children away from their moms and dads when they cross the border, including those seeking asylum. The bill would, however, allow the government to detain children for longer, leaving the door open for migrant families to be detained together indefinitely. The bill would also fulfill a Trumpian wish list of immigration restrictions, which the president has made clear he wants to trade for the separated children. Curbs on family reunification, an end to the diversity visa lottery, and of course, funding for the border wall, which candidate Trump promised his fervent fans that Mexico would pay for, but they won't. Unlike a handful of Republicans in Congress, members of the Trump White House expressed no misgivings about the policy. And according to the New York Times, both Chief of Staff John Kelly and Senior Advisor Stephen Miller have long advocated a hardline approach to migrant families, with Kelly floating the idea of separating parents and children as early as March of 2017. Ask Steve Bannon, and it becomes clear that this is what they have always wanted to do.
We ran on a policy, very simply, stop mass illegal immigration and limit legal immigration, get our sovereignty back, and to help our workers, okay? And so he went to a zero-tolerance policy. Zero tolerance, it's a crime to come across illegally, and children get separated. I mean, I hate to say it, that's the law.
Well, since Republicans won't do it, that leaves Democrats to advocate for these migrant children. Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, whose first attempt to visit a detention center in Texas went viral, is returning to the border today with other Democratic members of Congress. And less than an hour from now, Congressman and Texas Senate hopeful Beto O'Rourke is leading a march to a tent city set up to handle the overflow of migrant children due to the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy. And so, since reason has not prevailed, the question is, can protest force the Trump administration to back down and stop separating migrant parents and kids, perhaps starting on Father's Day? Joining me now, Maria Teresa Kumar, President and CEO of Voto Latino, Clara Long, Senior Researcher at Human Rights Watch, and from McAllen, Texas, Mariana Atencio, MSNBC correspondent. And Mariana, I want to start with you. You spoke with a woman who had been separated from her 18-year-old. I want to play a little bit of that interview that you did and then talk with you about it on the other end.
Miriam, when was your son taken from you? ¿Cuándo te quitaron a tu hijo? Right after we crossed the border, they took my son. I never saw him again. ¿Qué te dijeron? What did they tell you?
No, nada, ni una referencia de él.
They didn't say anything about where they were taking him. ¿Cómo se siente cuando le quitan a un hijo? How does one feel when your child is taken from you?
No, por todo el camino venía llorando.
I cried the whole way here.
Me duele haber dejado a mi hijo.
It hurts to have left my son inside and I don't know anything about him.
Mariana, it's very hard to watch that interview, and it's hard to believe that anyone seeing that couldn't be completely moved, distraught to think that this is what, you know, the United States of America is doing to families. Give us a little bit more of your reporting on what these families are going through. Do they even have the opportunity to find out where their kids are?
Joy, in the case of Miriam, that mother from Honduras, who, as you saw, was holding little Emily, her 1-year-old girl, she was completely distraught because she knew nothing of her 18-year-old son, Anderson. She didn't even know where he was or if she could talk to him on the phone, when would be the next time she would be able to see him. And for that family specifically, it was especially heartbreaking because Anderson, the son, had turned 18 4 days after crossing the border illegally. They're from Honduras, fleeing gang violence, extremely high levels of violence in that triangle in Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. 2 of those countries have been called the murder capital of the world for a reason. So these families are already reaching the southern border traumatized, only to find out that now they have to deal with family separation. I've also talked to young kids who've been separated from their adult male fathers inside detention, Joy. One little kid specifically, Ramon, 4 years old, who was separated from his dad inside detention for 5 days. And he told me he cried himself to sleep every night, asking immigration officials, where's my dad? Where's my dad? Holding on to this little wrinkled piece of paper that just had a phone number. It was the only belonging that he had left from, his home country. And even though separation in detention, especially as it comes to adult male fathers and boys, did happen under Obama, these interviews have given me a glimpse at the trauma that these children and these parents, especially the fathers on a day like today, Father's Day, are having to endure. And again, the trauma doesn't start when they reach the U.S. border. It begins in their home countries and then making that long trek north through Mexico to finally reach the U.S. border, hoping to get some relief, some respite, and then finding out that they're going to be separated.
And Mariana, before I go on to the rest of the panel, can I just ask you, are there attorneys present? Is there any activity ACLU? Is there anyone trying to intervene other than these members of Congress that are coming down on behalf of these families? Do they have legal advice?
So Congress members will actually be protesting in front of the CBP facility where I'm standing now. That is a Father's Day protest slated for 2 p.m. Eastern today. But I spoke to more than 24 families, many of whom have been separated in detention, and they really had no legal advice, save for these nuns at that Catholic Charities Center where I was yesterday. They don't even speak the language, Joy. They needed instructions as to how to even get on the bus with their ankle bracelets. Most of them will show up at immigration courts in the coming days, and they consider themselves the few lucky ones because at least they were reunited with their children after being released for further immigration proceedings from these detention centers. But they know that other families aren't so lucky. And again, especially on a day like today, you have to think about the children and the parents at the core of this crisis. Almost 2,000 separated in the span of 6 weeks. Just even in the Southern District courts here, according to the Federal Public Defender's Office, over 350 children were taken from their families just in a 2-week span of June. Because right around the corner from here, Joy, is the federal courthouse. And I sat in that courthouse on Friday. There are no cameras allowed inside, but that's where you really saw this zero tolerance policy at work. Mass prosecutions, less than a minute per case. Guilty, guilty, guilty. All first-time offenders, people who cross the border illegally, fleeing gang violence, but really very little time for each case, and dozens of families that were separated.
Wow.
Joy?
Thank you, Mariana. I'm going to ask you to just stay for just a moment. I want to bring in Clara Long. The Washington Post has reported, Clara, that the chief of the Rio Grande Valley Border Patrol has said that this is going to increase. Manuel Padilla Jr., who's the Border Patrol chief of the Rio Grande Valley, told the Washington Post on Thursday that his agents had separated 568 parents from children as young as 5 since the zero tolerance policy was announced on April 6th. But that figure represented only half the number of parents who could be prosecuted for entering the country illegally, leaving Border Patrol plenty of room to ramp up family separations. And we were just talking with Mariana Atencio, who also was in the courtroom when cases such as one that was reported on CNN of an undocumented immigrant from Honduras sobbing as she told an attorney how federal authorities took her daughter while she was breastfeeding the child at a detention center, taking a daughter away from her mom in the midst of being breastfed. Clara, I really wanted to talk to you or someone from Human Rights Watch on this, because it's hard to imagine that in modern America, I mean, the United States has a history, unfortunately, but in the modern history of this country, this is unimaginable. Your thoughts?
Indeed. I mean, there's a reason why human rights law and U.S. law protect the right to family and the right to be with your family, because it is so core to our psychological stability. This is only going to get worse, as you raised. The prosecutions, the Trump administration has said that it wants a zero-tolerance policy, 100% prosecutions, but it's not there yet. So as it ramps up, that means only more families ripped apart. We have a staff member, I was on the ground in San Diego this week. We have a staff member on the ground in Texas who spoke with families this week who said they were not given a chance to say goodbye. They were told, we're taking your child to shower, or you'll see your child after court, and when they came back, they were separated. The impact of this can't be overstated. It's horrific.
Maria Teresa Kumar, we learned this week, courtesy of the New York Times, that John Kelly has been advocating this very policy since March of 2017, that he was instrumental in it, that Stephen Miller, who we don't talk that much about anymore since we stopped talking about the euphemism alt-right, but he's still there. He's still in the administration. New York Times reports that he said, no nation can have the policy the whole classes of people are immune from immigration law or enforcement. He said during an interview in his West Wing office this past week, it was a simple decision by the administration to have a zero-tolerance policy for illegal entry. The message is that no one is exempt from immigration law. That, he's back, Stephen Miller. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, this is absolutely right. John Kelly floated this, and I started sounding the alarm the moment he started floating this, because they're not playing around. They have a zero tolerance because of a policy that they implemented, not Congress. But I want to go back. We've been working really closely with organizations on the ground in Tornillo, Texas. Tornillo is the first tent city, the first internment camp, where right now, in less than 24 hours, they brought in 98 beds for children. They're hoping to expand it to over 200 beds in the next week or so. And they purposely chose a place 45 minutes outside of El Paso, Joy, in the middle of nowhere, where they couldn't get cameras, where they couldn't get witnesses. And today, Beto O'Rourke is marching. You were asking earlier, what do those organizations, what do people need? They need lawyers. They need people, and they need lawyers to basically flood, just like they did the airports with the Muslim ban. They need lawyers right now. If people want to sign up to be lawyers, we have set up a website called stopseparation.org, and there you can find also local resources and local organizations that need help, because they are completely overwhelmed and they do not have the capacity. So if, again, people want to pitch in, they go to stopseparation.org, and they can find more information, again, about people on the ground. They are also going to be learning about, they can also provide their information, and if they are lawyers, please flag that, and we will basically, we'll be able to actually choose, funnel them to where they need to be. But this policy that the administration is piping is not only cruel, but the words that they're using, we're going to take your children to showers and be right back. This is history repeating itself. And Americans, this can't happen on our watch. We were the ones that actually helped craft human rights policy. The UN last week came in and told us that we were violating human rights laws that set by international standards that we crafted as Americans. We have to make sure that we are present. We cannot let this stand down. We are planning stopseparations.org. We are planning a march on June 27th. We hope that everybody will be there. It'll be from El Paso to Tornillo, Texas, because this cannot go uncontested. Yeah. And sadly, the reason the administration is doing this is because they have no other policy. They're not helping the American people as they should. And so what they're doing is they're race baiting and being divisive. But I know that the policy that they are implementing right now does not know political party. And we know that this is not who we are as Americans. And we have to, we cannot sit idly by.
And Maria Teresa, it's stopseparations with an S.org?
StopSeparation.org. Let me actually.
Okay, we're going to because I want to put it on our social media. Mariana, you wanted to get in.
Joy, if I may jump in just to emphasize what Maria was saying about the importance of providing these families with legal help. We're also talking here about families who are asylum seekers. I spoke to Jency and her 11-month-old baby. She turned herself in at a port of entry to Customs and Border Protection, and she said, I have credible fear about what's happening in my country. I want to seek asylum in the United States, which is her international right. Only to find out that the guidelines for asylum have changed. Only to find out, as Jeff Sessions issued new guidelines this past week, that now gang violence isn't going to be enough to justify these asylum claims. She didn't even know that the guidelines had changed until I told her yesterday. So this is a 21-year-old girl with an 11-month-old baby. It took her a month and a half to reach the U.S. border, and now she's completely alone, sitting there at this Catholic charity shelter with an ankle bracelet on her foot, not knowing if anybody could legally help her even process her asylum claim. Yeah. And I said to her, you know, what do you know for sure? And she said, Mariana, the only thing that I know for sure is that if I go back to Honduras, I'll be killed, because the father of my child was already killed. So legally, these families have absolutely no help. The asylum seekers and also the ones who crossed over illegally but are also fleeing those same levels of violence and are now getting their children yanked from their arms.
Yeah. And Joy, something to be clear. Crossing the border, even under this law, crossing the border, yes, it's a broken law, but it's considered a misdemeanor.
Right.
If you do it the first time. 99% of the people that are crossing right now, it's their first time crossing. It's a misdemeanor. We're separating families from children over a misdemeanor charge. Yeah. They are also separating siblings. So if you cross with your sibling, they are separating siblings and letting them only see them once a week. Oh my God. That is cruelty.
Clara, and I'm just very quickly under international law. I mean, these are the people, particularly people who are seeking asylum, but really anyone being separated from their children is cruel and unbelievably cruel. But don't people who present themselves for asylum obtain certain rights, certain legal rights?
They certainly should obtain certain rights. It's not illegal to seek asylum in a country, and it's not illegal to enter a country to seek asylum. One of the things I think is really important to emphasize here is that the members of Congress, the citizens, the lawyers who are mobilizing around this issue also need to consider that these abuses that we're seeing right now are built on top of an already existing structure of abuses. Already the federal criminal justice system was doing 50% of these prosecutions last year. These prosecutions, these misdemeanor and some felony prosecutions for illegal entry. So there's a lot to change here, and we need to think about how we can change the structure so that something like this can't happen again.
Absolutely, and while emphasizing the fact that the family separation policy is not the law of the United States, it is the policy of the current administration. Maria Teresa is going to stick around. Thank you, Clara Long, Mariana Atencio, for your heartbreaking, brilliant reporting. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And more on the most shocking and heartbreaking story in America next. On the crisis of family separations at the border with my panel. Joining me now, Tiffany Cross, the managing editor of The Beat DC, Jonathan Capehart, MSNBC contributor, and E.J. Dionne, columnist for The Washington Post. Thank you all, friends, for being here. Tiffany, you know, it was difficult to get through that first block of television without crying, quite frankly, because you're talking about taking a breastfeeding child from their mom. It just doesn't get any worse than that, right? Yeah. And so I wonder, just on the politics of this, you have some Republicans expressing a discomfort with it, but no Republicans signing on to the Democratic bill that would actually end it. So where are we now in terms of the politics of this?
Well, essentially, this bill puts a $25 billion price tag on these undocumented immigrants who are here, because what Trump is saying is, if you at any point defect from my border wall, I'm going to rescind any pathway to citizenship for Dreamers. They're trying to sell this idea that they're not, that this bill will somehow stop families from being separated. Right. It in no way does that. There's no language in there that's specific to that. Yep. And I want the audience to understand as well, there's only so much you can do in a Republican-controlled Congress. So there have been some efforts made by Democrats to try to stop policies and try to inject some righteousness in this just terrible, horrific policy that they've instituted. So the Tri-Caucus leaders, they've actually, ICE agents have actually gone on Greyhound buses to yank families off and separate them there. So the Tri-Caucus this week wrote a letter to the president of Greyhound, David Leach, saying, hey, you can't do that. That violates the rights of these people. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, for all the people who are saying these things aren't really happening, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal out of Seattle, Washington, she went to visit like 1,600, I think, immigrants who were bused there. And these things are absolutely happening. Just like the correspondent said in the last segment, these are firsthand accounts of this happening. And to the people who are saying, which we talked a little bit about, that this is just grossly un-American, this is very American. This is very consistent with the way this country was founded, from the way they treated African, I won't call them immigrants, African slaves who were kidnapped and raped and brought here. Those families were separated, our descendants, Native American families. This is very consistent with the way this country has done. I think the difference now is the rising majority has the tools to be able to stop and say, no, this is unacceptable. We aren't going to tolerate it. And this is why votes matter in a midterm year. This is why people who have the ability to switch the control of Congress, everything counts right now. These are literally lives, and they have to start becoming we. They're not doing this to them, they're doing this to us. And we have to lock arms and demand that our elected officials demand something different from this administration. Republicans and Democrats alike, if you have a heart of decency, interject and say something.
And you know, Jonathan Capehart, I think Tiffany makes an important point, because, you know, the history of the United States does include family separation, but it also includes people finding ways to morally justify what was happening, right? Slavery didn't endure for hundreds of years without people somehow coming up within themselves a moral justification for owning other people, or the separation of Native American families, or, you know, people still revere FDR, but you had the internment of Japanese Americans whose families were separated, who were dragged off and put in camps. So there's a way that people justify it. So I wonder if, as we're here, you know, almost weeping over these stories, if the moral justification, if the heartbreak justification, if it actually works, if people want this policy, they aren't going to change their minds because they see pictures like this. You had Steve Bannon, who was on back on TV, who was saying that even if Republicans pass this watered-down version of the bill, which won't stop family separation, by the way, and which will actually make it harder for families to unify in the United States, this is what he said about that bill, which, again, isn't going to solve this problem, but is just an immigration bill. This is Steve Bannon on whether or not passing that bill would help Republicans.
If they support this bill, I think this is the way that deplorables don't come out. I think this is the way potentially lose 50 seats. Otherwise, I think we run the tables. This is why I'm saying, at the time that people in the White House thought about this, they thought there was going to be a blue wave, right? And this is the best they could do at the time. I strongly recommend that we just wait till 2019, right, to address this, because I think we're going to have a big November. And we'll play this from a position straight.
Jonathan, that is Donald Trump's former chief strategist, and maybe shadow chief strategist still, saying that these pictures of families being dragged apart, of siblings being dragged away from each other, being told they can't hug, of breastfeeding moms having their children ripped away from them, that is good for the Republican Party, and they should keep letting this happen, because in his mind, the, quote, deplorables, the base, likes and wants this policy to continue.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the white nationalist, that is Steve Bannon, is probably right. There's a reason why the president is doing this. This plays well with that hardcore, xenophobic white nationalist base that loves these pictures, that think that what's happening is what should happen. And they have their own interlocutor there in the White House in the form of Stephen Miller. Joy, this is, I agree with Tiffany that in some instances that what's happening is very American, in that this is how the country was founded. This is what happened to our ancestors. This is what happened to Native Americans. This is what happened 76 years ago to Japanese Americans in internment camps. But as Tiffany said, now what's different now is that the American people have the ability to change this. This is not American. This is not America. This is not what the vast majority of the American people want. And I want people to understand that these elections in November have nothing to do, or should have nothing to do, with some political advantage for Republicans who want to use crying children and inhumane policy for political advantage. These pictures should show the American people, hold a mirror up to the American people and see what the U.S. government, what the President of the United States is doing supposedly in their name. This is not who we are. And if we're going to talk about the November elections, if those pictures don't galvanize and motivate good-hearted, good-natured, empathetic Americans to come out and vote to at least put people in Congress, in state houses, in governors' houses who will change this to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Go to the next person, Joy, because I'm like you from the first segment. I cannot believe, as a journalist, as an American citizen, that I am talking about an American government that is doing this, and a Congress that is controlled by the Republican Party won't do anything about it. Look how far we've fallen from George W. Bush, Republican president, talking about compassionate conservatism, to we're talking about President Donald J. Trump, who couldn't care less about children being ripped away from their families. The Speaker of the House, who couldn't care less, apparently, about children being ripped away from their families. I'm glad you started the show with that clip of Speaker Ryan talking about how wonderful it is to have his family. I hope he sees these pictures and internalizes them, and to put himself in the place of these families who don't have their children with them on this Father's Day.
Yeah. And EJ, there are more than one bill. The Democrats have put forward a bill that's sponsored by Dianne Feinstein of California. She has 39 Democratic co-sponsors, 0 Republican co-sponsors. The update, according to her tweet, is that 43 senators now support her bill to bar this taking of children, no Republicans. And then you have this Republican bill, this House bill, that gives wide latitude to the Department of Homeland Security to detain entire families. It reads, there exists no presumption that an alien child who is not an unaccompanied alien child should not be detained, and all such determination shall be at the discretion of the Secretary of Homeland Security. According to Vox, that sentence would overrule a court agreement put in place for 20 years called the Flores Agreement that strictly limits how the government can keep children in detention. Essentially, it would allow ICE to detain families as long as they want, indefinitely. That is the supposed fix that Steve Bannon says is too kind. Your thoughts, EJ?
Pretty humane, isn't it? I mean, I never thought I'd say this, but I think I have a higher opinion of a bunch of the people who voted for Donald Trump than Steve Bannon does, because the cruelty of this policy, the violation of family values. Here we are, as Jonathan pointed out, on Father's Day, talking about a policy that rips kids away from their fathers. And let's not mince words about this. The administration has been very clear that cruelty is a policy here because they want kids ripped away, because that will be a disincentive for people to come up to try to cross the border. So zero tolerance becomes zero humanity. And the Republicans, there were 2 more signatures you needed on a discharge petition that would have allowed votes on far more humane immigration bills. There are, as you said, the Feinstein bill, very clear bills that actually could stop this. Instead, they're going to be voting on watered-down bills that keep trying to make concessions to the administration because Paul Ryan doesn't want to pass anything Trump won't sign. One last quick point. You mentioned moral justification. To have Jeff Sessions quoting Romans 1 on obeying the law as being at the heart of this, Stephen Colbert really got to the nub of it when he said that about 10 verses later, Romans says that love is the basis of the law. Yeah. And that's why even conservative evangelical leaders are jumping off the Trump train on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. All of my guests will be back in our next hour. Thank you to all 3 of you. So you guys are sticking around. Up next, Mariam Joy.
You are the attorney whose family the cartels killed.
Not they.
My father. Now you hunt them.
Adios.
The CIA's most feared assassin is a Sicario.
And this girl witnessed the mission.
But
The Pope, more than anybody else, has driven the migrant crisis in Europe. That's why you have a new government in Italy. Pope. The Pope, yes. Yeah, by the way, the Catholic Church, I've gone after Cardinal Dolan. Cardinal Dolan's attacked me. The Catholic Church is one of the worst instigators of this open borders policy, right? The Catholic, and I'm a Catholic. I'm missing Mass today. I'm missing Mass today, or going later with my dad to be on your show.
Wow. Well, it's been 10 months since former Trump administration chief strategist Steve Bannon left the White House. But as his former boss cozies up to dictators and implements a policy that has separated nearly 2,000 migrant children from their moms and dads at the southern border in the last 6 weeks, it seems fair to ask if Bannon ever really went away. The so-called alt-right ideologist who helped mastermind Trump's rise has been working to build a worldwide ultra-right-wing movement. He once called anti-immigration strongman and Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, quote, a hero. And it appears Trump feels the same way. Per the White House, Trump spoke to Orban Saturday to, quote, congratulate him on the formation of his new government. Joining me now is Joe Cirincione of the Plowshares Fund, and from Beirut, foreign policy analyst Roula Jibril. Thank you both. And I want to just warn the audience, Roula is on about a 2-second delay. So I'm going to start with Roula first. Roula, you have Donald Trump congratulating Viktor Orban, the wannabe strongman in Hungary. You have him praising Giuseppe Conte, the sort of Trumpian Italian prime minister. Let's listen to that via Fox News on Friday.
The new Prime Minister of Italy is great. Got to meet him. Very, very strong on immigration, like I am, by the way. It seems that strong on immigration wins now. Sure. But and the Democrats, by the way, are very weak on immigration.
And Roula, Victor, of course, Giuseppe Conte, anti-EU, anti-immigration. This is a trend that's global. It's not just in the United States.
It's a project. It's not even a trend, Joy. Look at the data, and it's time for us Americans and people around the globe to connect the dots. The first time we heard about the destabilization of Western democracy was in 2011, when Trump campaign chief Paul Manafort was advising the Ukraine president. The first time we ever heard "lock her up" about a political female opponent was in 2011. Paul Manafort went on to disseminate op-eds around the globe defending the corrupt pro-Russian Ukrainian president, and then immediately after, we could see articles attacking Hillary Clinton in the Wall Street Journal, written by Alan Friedman and other journalists. It was a orchestrated campaign to start widespread campaign to pave the ideas of, if you are pro-Russian, then you can be not only pro-Russian, then you can be attack Europe, you can be pro-Brexit, you can attack immigrants, and it went on. He became the chief campaign of Donald Trump. Steve Bannon, as you mentioned before, is now in Italy. Before, he was in France. He spoke at the National Front, and he said, if they call you racist, wear it as a badge of honor. He's now advising the pro-Russian government in Italy. This is what he's doing. Not only that, if you look what they are doing in Germany, they are Trump himself sent his right-hand man, and he's trying to unseat the government of Angela Merkel, who's a right-wing. She happened to be a right-wing chancellor, but they don't care. They want nationalists. They want white supremacists. So we are in an existential threat for our democracy today. And we see all these players moving internationally and threatening the rule of law, threatening and attacking European governments, attacking allies while praising tyrants. I just want to remind our audience that in Italy, a month before the election, one of the candidates of another region went on a shooting spree in Italy, because he exploited all the hate rhetoric by Salvini and this government that attacked migrants and attacked Democrats. Not only he shot 6 immigrants, black people in the street, but also he shot against the center of the Democratic parties. We are seeing in Italy a descent towards fascism. That's why they agree with Donald Trump. That's why they praise Putin. And that's why they wanted Putin to be reinstated in the G7 again, regardless of the fact that he annexed and occupied Crimea, we're seeing a very worrisome trend, and Donald Trump is the chief of that trend.
And, you know, Joe, I think for Americans, you know, they look at Trump as this sort of aberrational figure. You know, here's this reality show star who comes along. He wins on this anti-immigrant line, immigration being the driving force behind his base. But I think because Americans don't realize that in Western Europe, really, as Rula just said, the same trend is happening. You have in Poland this sort of descent from what was a purely sort of democratic Western-facing government. You have it happening in Italy. You had the National Front attempt to take over France, just barely losing that election, and Emmanuel Macron winning. You have this happening in Hungary. You have this it's a combination of anti-EU, pro-Putin, and anti-trade and anti-immigrant, and it's happening all over the world. We just learned this week more about the involvement of Russia in Brexit. British political operatives met with the Russian ambassador days after the Trump visit. You have Brexit now, we're finding out that was involved. You just have the World Cup happening now in Russia, and there's a photo of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman shaking hands with Putin at the opening. This is global, and Americans are just part of the wave.
That's exactly right, Joy. We have to pay attention to this rise of racist, white nationalist, right-wing movements in Europe and see the parallels here to the Trump administration. Unfortunately, Trump is not an apparition. Many of our Western colleagues thought that they'd see something like this in Europe first, but it happened in America, where you had a similar magnetic leader exploiting divisions and conflict in society to rule what's basically from a minority position, and that's the same thing you see in Europe. One of my mentors here in Washington has been Madeleine Albright, and she has a new book called Fascism: A Warning. And she's not saying that these movements are fascist yet, but they bear a striking resemblance to the fascist movements that, as she reminds us, began almost 100 years ago in Italy in March of 1919. These divisions, this ultra-nationalism, this emphasis on strong male leadership. And you see it now in Hungary, you see it in Poland, and now in Italy, Giuseppe Conte is the first of these white nationalist leaders to take power, and he's threatening to break up the EU in a way that it hasn't quite been challenged before, exploiting these divisions in society, this resentment, this fear of immigration. He just turned away a ship of immigrants trying to seek refuge on Italy's southern coast to consolidate his rule. It is a dangerous trend, and you see Trump embracing it and inviting Giuseppe Conte to visit the White House. That will be quite a spectacle.
Yeah, I mean, the danger is that we're seeing a potential realignment.
It's already fascism, if I may.
Yeah.
It's actually fascism. I think we shouldn't mince any more words. This is fashion ascending. This is when the reality in front of us, where children are ripped from their parents, and that is called law, and taking on the southern. This is the worst humanitarian and crisis. This is a crisis of democracy, our value. The world is divided by two camps: humanists versus those who believe in white supremacist nationalists who want to destroy democracy. They don't care about law, human rights, morality, legality. All they care about is power, whatever it takes to get power. This is who Donald Trump is. He is galvanizing in Europe the worst white supremacists we ever seen. Giuseppe Conte is only one of these guys, but in Hungary there's another guy. And guess who's behind that? All of that is Russia.
Yeah.
They're backing every movement of white nationalism.
Yeah, it is frightening, and Americans just need to take this global view, understand this is not just happening here. Joe Cirincione, Rula Jibril, thank you both. And coming up in our next hour, the media's ongoing dilemma with Trump's campaign of disinformation. And on this Father's Day, we'll have more on how Trump is separating little kids, babies, children from their parents. More AM Joy after the break.
I love my grandma.
As you grow older, your brain naturally begins to
places like California, the same person votes many times. You probably heard about that. They always like to say, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. Not a conspiracy theory, folks. Millions and millions of people. And it's very hard because the state guards their records. They don't want to see it.
Nope. It's not a conspiracy theory. It is a lie. The myth of voter fraud has long been used to justify voter suppression tactics against minorities. And this week, Republicans, whose crusade has been to reduce voter access by claiming voter fraud, received a huge victory when the Republican majority on the Supreme Court upheld one of the most aggressive voter suppression laws in the country. And here to explain is Dale Ho, director of the ACLU's Voter Rights Project, and Ohio State Representative Alicia Reese. First, I want Dale, let you explain the Supreme Court ruling.
So what the Supreme Court held is that it's okay for the state of Ohio to treat your right to vote as use it or lose it. If you don't vote, the state can target you for removal on the assumption that you've moved out of your county and are no longer eligible to vote.
Yeah, and so the dissent, Sonia Sotomayor wrote a dissenting opinion in which she wrote the following. This purge program burdens the right of eligible voters. At best, purged voters are forced to needlessly re-register if they decide to vote in a subsequent election. At worst, they're prevented from voting at all because they never receive information about when and where elections take place. So in your view, is this just a way of essentially committing, essentially locking voters out because they don't return a postcard?
That's exactly what it is, right? So Ohio says if you don't vote in a 2-year period, we're going to send you a postcard. You don't return that. We're going to assume you've moved to another county. We're going to knock you off of the rolls. Now, if you look at the nationwide data, only about 4% of people move out of their county every year. But if you look at a midterm election, in Ohio, something like 60% of people don't vote in a midterm election. So they're assuming that all of these people haven't voted and then target them to kick them off of the rolls. In 1 year, 2012, they targeted 1.5 million voters under this program to knock them off. A Reuters analysis found that black voters in Cincinnati were about twice as likely to be purged from the rolls as compared to people living in predominantly white neighborhoods.
And Alicia Reese, State Representative Alicia Reese, when these cards go out, is it made clear to the people receiving them, you must return this card or you will lose your right to vote?
Well, yeah, they send the cards out, and some of them have different language. But I think the bigger picture here is that since the election and re-election of President Obama, there have been a number of attacks on voting rights, and the courts are not being, are not going on our side, ruling on our side. And that's why we're on the ground. And I truly believe that the answer is we've got to do the hard work, and we're moving to state rights now. So now we have to get voting rights explicitly in the state constitutions. Most state constitutions around this country don't explicitly protect your right to vote or give you the right to vote. And so that's why we've been pushing, and I want to thank you, you've had me on your show, we've been pushing for a voter bill of rights. We have over 100,000 signatures. Roland Martin keeps this out front as well. And we've got to do the hard work. We've got churches and sororities and people on the ground, but depending on Clarence Thomas, it's just not going to happen. We have to get it enshrined in the state. And at the DNC, I was on the platform committee. We put it in the platform, but it's sitting on a shelf. It hasn't been funded. We don't need a Band-Aid. We need to get our voting rights in the Constitution. And if we had that, we wouldn't have these kind of problems. It wouldn't matter who gets elected for a couple years. It wouldn't be term limited. But we've got to get people to really focus on this and put the money up and hit the ground. We've hit the ground. We've got to get the funders to come out here. And I've been very frustrated because I'm frustrated that every election cycle, we have the same conversation. We keep going to the courts. We keep hoping that Clarence Thomas will do the right thing. He's not going to do it. We need a for the people, by the people movement. We've got it here in Ohio. Michigan has started as well. We've got some movement in Florida. It's time for the funders to step up and fund this movement so we can stop this for once and for all and not just use it when it's time for a campaign or worry about what our voting rights is going to be. We're going to state rights, and we've got to do this. So I hope that people will hit me up on their Twitter, but it's time for the funders, both the liberal groups, the progressive groups. It's time to fund this and get this done for the people and by the people, a voter bill of rights in the Constitution.
So just very quickly, Dale, if you could explain, because this is said a lot, but I don't think people understand it. Your right to vote, enshrined in the United States Constitution or not?
There's no provision of the United States Constitution that expressly guarantees your right to vote.
It's inherent in your state. Your state owns your right to vote, essentially.
Well, there are state law protections. There are prohibitions in the Constitution. You're not supposed to be able to discriminate on the basis of race or national origin or sex. But there's no explicit guarantee for a right to vote in the U.S. Constitution.
And we have a gutted Voting Rights Act. I want to just really quickly address this fake voter fraud myth that is used. Donald Trump tweeted, of course, he was happy about the Supreme Court decision, yay. But he also, after the 2016 election, more importantly, essentially pretended that he actually won.
Oh, yeah.
That he actually won the popular vote if you deduct all the people who voted legally.
Right.
This has been used before. It goes all the way back to the 1950s when people would say, well, we would have won except for all these voters who were fraudulent voters.
Right. These lies about people cheating in elections have always been used to justify restrictions. So back in, the Jim Crow era, they would have poll taxes and say, we need to have poll taxes to prevent poor people and black people from selling their votes. So there's a long and ugly history here. The one thing I will say is this. If the Supreme Court is going to say that your right to vote can be use it or lose it, we have one solution. Use it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point is, I think, and Representative Reese made this point as well, up to 60% of eligible voters do not vote in midterms. 6 in 10 voters. And if you don't vote in midterms, the Supreme Court has now just said you not exercising your vote gives your state the right to take away your right to vote. That's pretty much what it said, right?
Essentially.
And Ari Berman, who's been doing incredible work on this in Mother Jones, please read him, please, please, please. He just wrote an article, said the Supreme Court gave the green light to voter purges. Trump's Justice Department isn't wasting any time. And by the way, the Justice Department has already sued the state of Kentucky, asking them to purge their voter rolls. Use your vote. It will be taken away if people can. Dale Ho and State Representative Alicia Reese, thank you very much. More AM Joy after the break.
And when was your son taken from you? ¿Cuándo te quitaron a tu hijo? Right after we crossed the border, they took my son. I never saw him again. ¿Qué te dijeron? What did they tell you?
No, nada, ni una referencia de...
They didn't say anything about where they were taking him. ¿Cómo se siente cuando le quitan a un hijo? How does one feel when your child is taken from you?
No, por todo el camino venía llorando.
I cried the whole way here.
Me duele haber dejado a mi hijo.
It hurts to have left my son inside and I don't know anything about him.
Welcome back to AM Joy. Heart-wrenching stories and images of thousands of children being separated from their parents at the border are sparking outrage across the country. The White House is doubling down on the false claim that it's the Democrats who are responsible. Also, at times, ironically, justifying their policy as biblical. But some Democratic lawmakers are fighting back today, going to tour facilities where migrant children are being held and leading protests against the policy. And joining me now by phone is Texas Representative Beto O'Rourke, a candidate for the U.S. Senate against Ted Cruz, who in just a few minutes will lead a march to a tent camp in Tornillo, Texas, that's housing immigrant children. And Representative O'Rourke, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. Please tell us what you plan to do today and who's with you.
I'm with hundreds of my fellow El Pasoans in a march led by this community, leaders from all over the community, leaders in elected office, leaders who are just everyday citizens who are stepping up and making sure that at this critical moment that they're counted and that we bring the attention in the eyes of this country to Tornillo, where kids who have been taken from their parents after those parents have made this 2,000-mile journey, literally risking everything to get their kids to safety, to shelter, to refuge, to seek asylum. The consequence and the punishment for doing the most human thing that I can think of is this inhumane policy of family separation, taking that child from that mother, from that father, prosecuting like a common criminal those parents while those kids are shipped off to, in this case, this tent city in Tornillo, Texas, United States of America. This is on all of us at this moment. We'd like to say this is not America. This is not who we are. But right now, this is America, and this is who we are, and this is what we are doing. So the response, the public pressure, has to be brought to bear on members of Congress to adopt legislation to stop family separation and to make sure that we don't try to solve the problems of the world, the problems of those families at the U.S.-Mexico border, force that on these Border Patrol agents who should not be put in this position, and instead do the humane, the right, what I'd like to think is the American thing, and make sure that those families are kept together and that those seeking asylum are allowed to lawfully petition for asylum and ensure that we are following our own laws in the process.
And Congressman, you are a member of the House of Representatives. Donald Trump and many, many Republicans, his spokeswoman Sarah Huckabee Sanders and others, are claiming that it's Democrats and that there is some law on the books that is requiring these children to be separated. You're in Congress. Is there any law that requires these children to be separated from their parents?
If there were a law on the books, it would have been prosecuted by the George W. Bush administration. It would have been implemented by the Barack Obama administration. There's no such law on the books. And to be clear, he has chosen, and through his attorney general, enforced 100% zero tolerance family separation. This young 27-year-old mother that I just met at the Border Patrol station in McAllen, who had been apprehended hours before, apprehended because she turned herself in to a Border Patrol agent with her 7-year-old daughter, did not try to flee. They're holding hands, that 7-year-old girl and her 27-year-old mother, not knowing that within hours they would be separated, holding hands as they have been for the last 3 weeks, over the last 2,000 miles. She's talking to me through tears. I asked, why didn't you cross at a port of entry, which is the lawful way to petition for asylum? She doesn't know. And furthermore, in Reynosa, Mexico, those cartels control the crossing points. They determine where she crosses. She's just trying to get that little girl to safety. And she did not know that within hours that little girl would be taken from her. She, the mother, would be prosecuted, then turned over to enforcement and removal operations and sent back to her country, maybe not reunited with that girl that she made the journey for in the first place. So no, this is at the discretion of the Trump administration. It is cruel, it is inhumane, but it is now on all of us because this is U.S. policy, and all of us must stand up and own it and not relinquish our agency in this. We've got to do everything we can, and that's why we're in Tornillo. We want to make sure everyone sees this. Once it's part of our conscience, it's going to force us to act.
Last question to you. What is your opponent, Senator Ted Cruz? Has he said anything at all about this policy?
He is for family separation. He thinks, as does the administration, that this is some way to deter people from coming to this country, literally punishing young mothers and fathers, and more importantly and tragically, punishing their kids, the trauma that they are going to inflict in order to somehow change people's human decision to leave suffering and certain death to come to this country. You're either for family separation or you're against it, and I'm absolutely against it, and so I hope is this country.
Thank you. Thank you. Congressman Beto O'Rourke will be leading a protest in Tornillo, Texas today, who is running against Senator Ted Cruz for the United States Senate. Thank you, sir. And joining me now is Maria Teresa Kumar, Voto Latino, E.J. Dion, columnist at The Washington Post. And on the phone with me now, Michael Avenatti. He is Stormy Daniels' attorney. But this morning, while we were talking about this issue of family separation, he tweeted the following: if anyone knows a parent that has had their child taken from them at the border and not returned, please have them contact me as I am entering this fight. This outrageous conduct must be brought to an immediate end. Michael, thank you so much for calling in. You tweeted that this morning. Please tell us what you might be able to do. People are definitely all over my Twitter timeline asking how they can get in touch with lawyers who can help. So please tell us how you plan to help, sir.
Well, good morning, Joy. Thanks for having me. We were first contacted yesterday by a family who's been separated from their young child, a little girl, and so we've decided to enter this fight in a very big way. And if there's any other families that are in similar circumstances, we want them to contact us because we're going to put a significant amount of resources behind fighting what's going on here, Joy. I mean, this is an outrage. This is not my America. It is not our America. It is not what this country stands for, and it's an absolute disgrace when you have children separated from their parents and they take their shoelaces from them so these children won't hang themselves while detained. I mean, this is an outrage. All Americans should be outraged. I don't care if you're on the right and the left, the center. Every mother should be outraged, and we have to end this, and it needs to be ended now.
And Michael, you know, as an officer of the court, as a lawyer, as somebody who is a resident of California, which obviously shares a border with Mexico, where this issue is extant, how shocked are you that these families, these moms and dads, these kids are not being given legal representation?
Well, I'm very shocked, and it's entirely improper. And, you know, Joy, let me just say this. I mean, I'm going to call it like I see it because I don't know any other way to call it. if there was a white family from middle America that traveled to another country, even if they traveled there illegally and attempted to enter that country and had their little girl or little boy taken from them, separated from them, and detained like this nation, our nation, would be outraged. There would be calls to the State Department to get involved. There would be diplomatic missions. This would be front and center, and everyone would be outraged. Why is it different? Because individuals are trying to come to this country, whether it be for asylum or other purposes. Don't get me wrong. I believe in a strong border. I think we have to have a secure border. But regardless of why they come here, this is not appropriate. We cannot treat children this way. It's outrageous that this is going on in modern day America.
Yeah, it is pretty shocking, I think, for most people. E.J. Dionne, the administration from the president on down have been pretending that this is a policy that is the Democrats' policy, trying to both take credit for it with their own base and brag about it with their own base, but blame Democrats for it publicly. I want to let you listen to our own Chuck Todd of Meet the Press. He had a pretty contentious interview earlier this morning with Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president, about Donald Trump's immigration policies. Take a quick listen.
Congress passed a law that it is a crime. This is a congressional law from many years ago. It is a crime to enter this country illegally. So if they don't like that law, they should change it. If they don't like the fact that...
You can keep the families together. Why can't you find a way to still
Do you want the child in jail?
You keep the families together. Why don't you create a family detention center?
Well, we had those under President Obama, but the Democrats are holding up the funding to expand those.
EJ, your thoughts?
Well, you know, lies have become so common in the Trump administration that I think the only front page headlines should be Trump and administration tells the truth. On the rare occasion that happens, because news is supposed to be about the unusual. And we recall at the beginning of the administration that there was this big debate, well, should this be called lies? Should this or that false statement be called a lie? I think we made some progress. People are calling out the lies. But I think that there is this habit of giving the administration a chance to spin, and that spin then gets a life of its own, even if it's a blatant lie. We know that George W. Bush didn't pursue this policy. We know that Barack Obama, who was really tough on immigrants and was criticized by pro-immigration groups, never went to this extreme. There is nothing in the law that requires this. Jeff Sessions has bragged that this is an incentive for people not to bring their children here. It's really extraordinary that the news media now have to struggle with the idea that not an administration lies occasionally, that's happened before, but that the entire communication strategy of the administration seems to be built around getting people to accept things that are flat-out lies and making that part of their argument.
Well, and also belligerence. Maria Teresa Kumar, I want to let you listen to Sarah Huckabee Sanders, because the other policy is just sort of disparaging the media for even having the temerity to ask questions. Essentially, you're not to question them. Here is Sarah Huckabee Sanders in her exchange with Jim Acosta of CNN.
You just said it's in the Bible to follow the law.
That's not what I said, and I know it's hard for you to understand, even short sentences, I guess, but please don't take my words out of context. But the separation of illegal alien families is the product of the same legal loopholes that Democrats refuse to close, and these laws are the same that have been on the books for over a decade, and the president is simply enforcing them.
It's pretty stunning to me, Maria Teresa. They want the credit for doing this with their base. Steve Bannon is out there on TV today bragging about this policy and saying it's great. And they also don't want the responsibility for the policy. They want the Democrats to bear the responsibility for their ideas.
This demonstrates actually what the Trump administration has done from the very beginning. They have always talked from both sides of their mouth. They've always made sure that their base is getting the red meat that it needs, while the mainstream media, they sound reasonable. The only difference is that this policy that they implemented to separate families from children was basically under their watch, and it's now penetrating the media circle that usually they control, and that is why they're going to have to backtrack. But I have to say, this idea that the Republicans have been supporting this policy is also kind of shocking. They can't put legislation today that is right now on deck to say that they are going to stop this policy from the administration, and they have chosen not to. Let's not forget, the administration, the Republicans control every single branch of government right now. It is up to them to make this policy if they actually do care about family values. And they are saying loud and clear that there's different values for different colored families, and that is not okay.
Yeah, Paul Ryan, who you would think he wasn't in control of the United States Congress, here he is sort of woefully sort of feeling sad about the policy. Take a listen.
We don't want kids to be separated from their parents. I think I just made that really clear. And we believe because of the court ruling, this will require legislative change.
EJ, he can make legislative change. He's the Speaker of the House.
Right. Well, there are bills out there. He could just embrace bills that would stop the administration from doing this. He could also just have the guts to tell Donald Trump, no, this is wrong. I am a Republican speaker, and I'm not going to have the Republican Party stand for a policy like this. He doesn't do that. And even the moderates in the House, some of whom have at least put up a show of trying to get more reasonable legislation through, they should immediately say, if they want to live up to the moderation that they're talking about, that this policy is antithetical to what the Republican Party stands for, antithetical to family values, and it's not happening. Yeah. And it's very depressing to watch what Donald Trump has done to so many people in his party.
Yeah,
they are Donald Trump's party now.
Yeah.
Right. And Joy, I think that we have to make very clear. Paul Ryan controls the legislative calendar. What that means is that he chooses what bill goes before the floor.
Correct.
So he is actually the one that is preventing this policy from stopping, short of Donald Trump waking up literally right now and saying, you know what, we're in this. This is too cruel. But this is on their watch. This is on their shoulders.
The two people who decide what legislation gets on the floor are named Mitch McConnell in the United States Senate and Paul Ryan in the House. They decide what goes. This sort of helplessness is like, oh, what can we do? You can do everything. You guys control the entire government. One last exit question for Michael Avenatti, because I'm sure people are tweeting this at me right now. I'm not even looking at my phone, but I know it is happening. How can these families in need get in touch with you or your firm? Is there an email address they should use? How can people reach out to you?
The best bet, Joy, actually is by direct messaging my Twitter account individually, and we'll respond to those messages and those inquiries. But I do want to touch on one thing. This whole argument that somehow this policy was implemented by the Obama administration or some other administration, in my view, is a complete red herring. You know, this president has prided himself on overturning all kinds of policies and procedures and mandates by the Obama administration over the last 18 months. He's prided himself on that. Why would this be any different, even assuming what he says is true, which, of course, it's not true? It doesn't matter who implemented this policy. We are where we are, and it needs to be changed now.
You make an excellent point. He is the man who says he can pardon himself, says he cannot do anything about this policy that his own Attorney General implemented. Maria Teresa Kumar, E.J. Dionne, Michael Avenatti, thank you all for being here. Happy Father's Day to you, E.J. And coming up, Jim Comey, and to Michael Avenatti as well. I believe he's a dad as well. Jim Comey's back in the spotlight. We'll tell you why next.
Nice guy. But what they don't know is that I have a darker side, a badder side, a side you don't want to be on the wrong side.
Hey, honey. Did you remember to get the milk?
So as I was saying, I can be merciless.
Lease the Infiniti QX50 for $399 a month. Infiniti. Empower the drive.
How do you win at business? Stay at La Quinta, where we're changing with contemporary makeovers. Then use the ultimate power handshake, the upper hander with a double palm grab. Who has the upper hand now? Start winning today. Book now at lq.com.
Alice is living with metastatic breast cancer, which is breast cancer that is spread to other parts of her body. She's also taking prescription Ibrance with an aromatase inhibitor, which is for postmenopausal women with hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative metastatic breast cancer as the first hormonal-based therapy. Ibrance plus letrozole was significantly more effective at delaying disease progression versus letrozole. Patients taking Ibrance can develop low white blood cell counts, which may cause serious infections that can lead to death. Before taking Ibrance, tell your doctor if you have fever, chills, or other signs of infection, liver or kidney problems, are pregnant, breastfeeding, or plan to become pregnant. Common side effects include low red blood cell and low platelet counts, infections, tiredness, nausea, sore mouth, abnormalities in liver blood tests, diarrhea, hair thinning or loss, vomiting, rash, and loss of appetite. Alice calls it her new normal because a lot has changed, but a lot hasn't. Ask your doctor about Ibrance, the #1 prescribed FDA-approved oral combination treatment for HR-positive, HER2-negative MBC.
Hiring was always a huge challenge. Endless hours on job sites with not a lot to show for it. Then, I found ZipRecruiter. They figured out hiring. I post my job, they put it all over the web, and they send me the right people, because their technology is smart. ZipRecruiter often sends me the right person in 24 hours.
ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Try it for free today at ZipRecruiter.com/star.
So you've decided to go to college. That's cool. So pop quiz. Which is a better way to earn your degree? Commute to college and fill your gas tank, get stuck in traffic, drive in bad weather, try to find a parking space, walk a half mile to class, or learn online at Independence University. You don't go to college. College goes to you. That's independence. That's Independence University. And all your supplies, including a brand new laptop and tablet, are included with tuition. Independence U for an independent you.
1-800-965-2558.
When we break news,
we have breaking news on the president's legal battle.
we are merely breaking the surface of the story.
The FBI raided the office of President Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen.
Because beyond those two words,
The United States is going to withdraw from the Iran deal.
is where the details lie.
Demonstration to protest against the U.S. Embassy.
Where the facts are buried.
This is the deadliest school shooting since the massacre in Parkland, Florida.
And the only way to uncover the whole story
We have news just breaking tonight.
is to dig deeper than anyone else.
The report thing, it totally exonerates me. There was no collusion. There was no obstruction. If you read the IG report, I've been totally exonerated.
Well, no surprise there. Donald Trump is using the DOJ Inspector General's report to claim total vindication in the Russia probe, when in fact it really actually had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the FBI director that he fired because of the Russia probe. What the scathing review actually did was prove that James Comey's handling of Hillary Clinton's email investigation sharply deviated from protocol, going so far as to label some of his actions as insubordinate. The report singles out this moment back in 2016 when Comey sharply criticized Clinton's use of a private email server, even though he was recommending no charges, along with his decision to send a letter to Congress reopening the Clinton email investigation just 11 days before Election Day, a move that many believe cost Clinton the election. But perhaps the most ironic thing to come out of the report was the revelation that Comey actually used his own private Gmail account to conduct official government business. To which, of course, Hillary Clinton could only respond, "But my emails." Joining me now, Tiffany Cross, co-founder of The Beat DC, politics editor at TheRoot.com, Jason Johnson, and Mother Jones Washington bureau chief David Corn. Thank you all for being here. I have to show this word cloud. I don't know if you guys can see it. You probably can only see one word on it because it's probably backlit. There it is. Jason Johnson, the 2016 election came down to one word. If you asked people about Hillary Clinton, you got this word back.
Yes.
Email.
Emails.
Emails was everything.
Everything.
The fact that Donald Trump wants to pretend that this IG report was about anything else other than the fact that the FBI probably swung the election to him.
Yeah.
It's pretty astonishing.
It's astonishing, but here's the thing. We say this sometimes, we're being glib, we're being funny, listen to black women. You know, James Comey didn't want to listen to Loretta Lynch. He didn't want to listen to a black woman who was his boss. Let's just be honest about it. He came and spoke at Howard and talked about this. Oh, it wasn't political. No, you were pissed that your black woman boss told you to be quiet. He didn't want to do it, and he went out and he swung an election. And I don't care how many times he tries to spin. I don't care how many justifications he comes up with. He affected that election. Everybody knows about the 60-day rule. Everybody knows that what he said before that election was absolutely unnecessary, and he will go down as probably the thing. And I can say this as a political scientist. Every poll, every analysis we showed, Everything switched after he made that statement.
Right.
And that's on him. And everything that happens in this government heading forward is between him, possibly the Russians, and Steve Bannon.
And let's play the carelessness. I remember I was here. I think I was sitting in for Chris Matthews that day because we were all waiting to hear what was this announcement going to be. And this is what it was. This was on July 5th of 2016.
Although we did not find clear evidence that Secretary Clinton or her colleagues intended to violate laws governing the handling of classified information, there is evidence that they were extremely careless in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information.
So James Comey has tweeted. He tweeted on Thursday, "I respect the DOJ IG office, which is why I urge them to do the review. The conclusion are reasonable, even though I disagree with some of them. People of good faith can see an unprecedented situation differently. I pray no director faces it again. Thanks to IG people for hard work." And he has, I went to a talk that he gave in which he also denies, that it was him that swung the election. But David Corn, you also covered this election, day to day to day to day to day. And the reality is you had the various things. You had the misinformation coming out of these Russian bot farms and factories that were pulling liberal voters away from Hillary Clinton and saying, don't trust her, don't trust her. That was primarily also about emails, right? When it wasn't about conspiracy theories. But you had that, but you did have this narrative that the media also picked up on, that something about her emails made her shady.
There was that, and I think you can't talk about what Comey did without talking about the fact that the campaign was the target of a Russian information warfare campaign. Up and for the 4 weeks, 3 weeks prior to Comey's telling Congress they were reviving the investigation of her emails, every single day, John Podesta's emails were being leaked out or produced by WikiLeaks as part of a Russian operation stolen by Russian hackers. And what that did for 3 weeks was keep the words Clinton and email in the headline. And even though she was the victim of that operation, day in, day out, kept reminding voters of Clinton and the email problem. And focus groups that were being done by the Clinton campaign at the time showed them that swing voters couldn't separate the Podesta email attack from the whole issue about her own email server. So that really set up, and that's why I think it was so potent at the end that Comey intervened that way. So it was a combination of the Russian attack, which Trump covered up for and said wasn't happening, and what Comey did.
Yeah, and encouraged by saying, hey, please find her emails, right? It's what Donald Trump called for them to do. And to the point that David just made, let's play John Podesta. He talked about the 2016 election and the Comey letters, et cetera, with Andrea Mitchell on Friday. Let's take a listen.
I actually do think we would have won if it hadn't been for that letter on October 28th. So, there's a lot of analysis. People can argue that one way or the other. But, overall, we won by 3 million votes, but we lost those 3 states. And, that's on us. And the net result was that Donald Trump is now president of the United States.
And the other thing, Tiffany, that was in that IG report that I think is getting glossed over a lot is that part of the reason that Jim Comey felt that he had to keep making statements about Hillary Clinton was this worry that the FBI New York office was this sort of bastion of what was called visceral Clinton hatred. Visceral Clinton hatred. Loretta Lynch, on statements that James Comey made to her, Loretta Lynch said, it's clear to me that there is a cadre of senior people in New York who have a deep and visceral hatred of Secretary Clinton. And he said it is deep. So the other piece that is, not brought out is that there was also a pocket of anti-Clinton hatred in the FBI, not anti-Trump.
Right, and this completely goes against the narrative that the president has been driving, that there's some deep state conspiracy against him. And so the question I think we really have to ask is, why is he doing this? So to David's point and to your point, during the election cycle when email was the constant storyline that you heard Hillary Clinton and her emails, which wasn't actually the case. And when you think about it, it's red meat for his base. When they hear things like that, when the MAGA people hear emails and Clinton, they were ready to jump for it. And you have to consider that they're not necessarily reading papers, right? They're watching the 24-hour news cycle, Fox News. They're not looking at deep analysis. They're reading his Twitter account. And when they're watching local news, these are typically Sinclair broadcast-owned stations who are feeding Trump's narrative directly into local communities. And so people take that and they take it as truth. And so what I think the Trump campaign learned is we can just lie. We can say whatever. We see that happening right now. We saw it on the campaign trail. And the media was complicit in this as well. The media was too happy to jump on this storyline and keep that same word association going with Hillary Clinton and emails, because there was a lack of, I always say there's always a lack of diversity in newsrooms. And there's this false narrative that if somebody comes on and they say, you know, the Trump administration is separating children at the border, the media for some reason feels like you have to have somebody come on and say they're not.
Right.
That's not good journalism. Right. It's not bad journalism to call this president a liar every single time it happens. Or say something
equally bad about Democrats to balance it out.
And we always, and I always felt this about WikiLeaks, you have to look at the source. Yeah. WikiLeaks doesn't curate their documents. So if they get something that could be manipulated, they're just going to hand it out there. Now, we know what kind of person Julian Assange is, and I know they're going to be all over my timeline. That's fine. Go ahead and do it. But at the end of the day, there needed to be more skepticism on the part of many press outlets. It's like, can we trust these guys? Right. Can we trust what WikiLeaks is putting out there? Why are they putting this out there? It seems to be coordinated and synchronized in particular ways. That, I think, is one of the greatest failures of the American press in not questioning how this was being used and why it was being given to them.
And David, you know, Clinton Cash got a full birth, you know, in mainstream media. It got excerpted. People took that narrative and ran with it. And at the same time, neither the FBI nor the media brought out the FBI investigation that was happening against the Trump campaign for something pretty serious, which is potential collusion with a foreign power.
Well, as you know, we get into this in great depth in the book I did with Isikoff, Russian Roulette. But the key thing is that the FBI is not supposed to talk about counterintelligence investigations, so it's hard to blame Comey for not talking about it. But there was a lot of media reporting, and the New York Times, you know, got a Pulitzer later, but really fell down on its face in terms of not reporting about the FBI investigation that it knew about into the Trump-Russia contacts. And of course, to Jason's point, when the Podesta emails are coming out over the course of weeks and weeks and weeks, the story is about the little political gossip in each one of those. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be reported, but the bigger picture that there's a Russian information warfare attack on the U.S. election, which by that point the Obama administration was saying that this is what's going on now, was getting very, very short shrift across all media platforms, not just the Times here. And that was the big failure here, that they didn't contextualize that the U.S. was being attacked while Donald Trump was saying, hey, nothing to see.
Yeah, and let's not also forget that the official announcement from the Obama administration that the Russians were interfering in our election came same weekend as Access Hollywood. And Access Hollywood got all the ink. Tiffany and Jason are sticking around. David Corn, thank you very much. And up next, Kellyanne Conway returns to Meet the Press. Good evening. Stay with us.
They're not on an island anymore.
Remember Cambridge Analytica, the company at the center of Facebook's scandal over the Trump campaign gaining access to millions of its users' data without their permission? Well, it looks like some of the band is getting back together, quietly working for Trump's re-election. The Associated Press reports, quote, at least 4 former Cambridge Analytica employees are affiliated with Datapropria, a new company specializing in voter and consumer targeting work similar to Cambridge Analytica's efforts before its collapse, unquote. The head of the new firm denies any link to the Trump campaign, but says it has agreed to do 2018 campaign work for the RNC. Check your voter registration. And Trump's campaign manager, Brad Parscale, told the AP no work by the company was planned for the re-election. Check your voter registration. We'll see. More AM Joy next.
It felt great. Overly dramatic about it, Chuck. You're saying it's a falsehood, and they're giving Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that. But the point remains.
Wait a minute. Alternative facts? Alternative facts, 4 of the 5 facts he uttered. The one thing he got right was Zeke Miller. 4 of the 5 facts he uttered were just not true. Look, alternative facts are not facts. They're falsehoods.
Good times. This morning, for the first time since she coined that phrase, alternative facts, more than a year ago, Kellyanne Conway was back on Meet the Press. This time, she parroted Donald Trump's false claim that the Democrats are responsible for Donald Trump's policy and his Attorney General Jeff Sessions' policy of separating migrant children from their parents at the border.
Nobody likes his policy. You saw the president on camera that he wants this to end, but everybody has, Congress has to act.
He can end it on his own.
Chuck, Congress passed a law that it is a crime. This is a congressional law from many years ago. It's a crime to enter this country illegally. So if they don't like that law, they should change it.
Alternative facts. Back with me, Tiffany Cross, Jason Johnson, and Jonathan Capehart. And joining me now, Michelle Bernard, president of the Bernard Center for Women Politics and Public Policy. Michelle, I'll let you react to that first. You have Kellyanne Conway back this morning. This is the new line. It's the RNC's talking points we heard yesterday. It's the new line from the White House. They want credit for the policy of separating migrant children from their parents at the southern border because their base likes it, but they want the blame for anyone who's horrified by it to go to the Democrats.
You know, I'll tell you, Joy, it's so difficult to watch all of the statements that anyone from this administration tries to make in support of this policy because it's just absurd. Kellyanne Conway has a difficult job because she has to go out and lie on behalf of the president. The same thing for Sarah Huckabee Sanders, doing the same thing on Friday. How people who are mothers can stand for this lie that the administration is telling, and it's just part of a strategy. Basically, the Trump administration is holding children hostage and saying to Democrats, if you pay for the border wall that I want, I will reunite these children with their parents. It's a strategy. It's horrible. It's a lie. And it's also part of the Trump belief that if you tell a lie often enough, it becomes the truth.
And Jonathan Capehart, here is Steve Bannon, who's often off message, but who is very much on policy with Donald Trump. He 100% agrees with him. He seems to still be the kind of Trump's brain, but he's just off message because he is 100% taking the credit for it. He likes this policy. He's out there promoting it this morning on the Sunday shows. And here Bannon is on ABC saying if Congress does not allocate money for the border wall, the wall Mexico was supposed to pay for, okay? But if the Congress, if the American taxpayer doesn't pay for Trump's wall, then the government should be shut down. Here's Bannon.
I would definitely shut down the government overall. Absolutely. Listen, let's get it all on the table. Here's the thing. President Trump's got a great saying internally when he's talking to you. No games. No games. We got to stop the games in the city. So, yes, I would say in September, if they have not allocated money for the wall, let's shut down the government. And by the way, on November 6th, let the voters decide.
Jonathan?
Well, Steve Bannon is all about shutting down the government, actually burning the whole thing down. So let's not be surprised by what he just said. And also, let's not be surprised that even though he's off message but likes the policy, he likes the policy because Steve Bannon is a white nationalist. He is all about sealing off the border, sealing off this country from anyone who might be black or brown. In this case, brown people who are fleeing conditions that are so horrendous that they would risk their own personal safety to make the journey and risk now separation of their families, obliteration of their families just by crossing the border either illegally in terms of law, which Maria Teresa Kumar said earlier is a misdemeanor, or by legally going to a place where they can ask for asylum. So, you know, we should listen to Steve Bannon because he is saying exactly what the president thinks, what the administration is pushing, what their goals are, and I think that the American people have to make it clear in voice and in vote and in however way they can that what is happening on the border and what is happening to migrants, asylum seekers, immigrants, what's happening to their families is unacceptable.
Yeah, and you know, ironically enough, the logical conclusion of what Kellyanne Conway is saying is that if crossing the border is a crime, then the Democrats should fix it, or Congress should fix it, meaning they should make it perfectly legal to cross the border, that would be the only fix. That's the logical conclusion of what they're saying. You know,
and Joy, also, I think it bears pointing out that if we go back to candidate Trump, I do believe that candidate Trump told the entire world that Mexico was going to pay for the wall, not the American taxpayer.
And now they're basically saying these children will remain hostage until Americans pay for the wall. You know, Jason, it's interesting that, you know, Steve Bannon is very explicit about the fact that reducing lawful immigration, particularly from countries south of the border, is a top priority of this administration. They want to change the census in order to reduce the immigrant population numerically. They want to take away people's nationality if people have already been naturalized. They want to say we're going to de-Americanize you and send you back anyway. It all kind of is going together to. It is going together in a very interesting way.
Yeah, it's a white nationalist policy, and you and I have talked about this, and Jonathan just mentioned it. And what people need to understand is white nationalism is not like, I don't want you in this neighborhood and I don't want you in Starbucks. You cannot accomplish white nationalism without basically turning the government into a terrorist organization, without terrorizing people and forcing them to leave, without encouraging violence either from state-sponsored actors or not investigating white nationalists. You have to literally terrorize people into leaving this country. And here's the other thing, and and I think this is important to understand, not just about these children at the border. This whole administration, it's like a Liam Neeson Taken movie. Like, these guys are terrorists, right? They are constantly taking hostages, whether it's Chip, whether it's DACA, whether it's the asylum. They have no problem taking kids and putting guns to their heads and then demanding the rest of the country do what they want them to do. Until we recognize that we are operating with a white nationalist government that will take children hostage to get what they want, even if it's just a tax cut, the Democrats and anyone else resisting doesn't really know what they're fighting.
The term used to be self-deportation when Mitt Romney was basically saying the same thing. Make conditions so bad for people that they will self-deport because we just want them to go away. You know, Tiffany, it's interesting because Bannon is also out this morning trying to do another sort of meta version of this, which is to try to pit black people against these immigrants because one of the things he said is, well, we can't get STEM jobs for black kids until we get rid of the too many Asians in so now it's like, well, you look at them, right? So there's a meta thing going on as well.
It's a failed system of divide and conquer that's not going to work. And I think when you look at the rhetoric coming from the President of the United States, so just this week alone, he's tweeted out, so he feels bad for Michael Flynn, who by his own admission colluded with Russia. He felt bad for the cuckoo Tommy Loren because she got some water splashed at her. He has said nothing about children being ripped from their families. He has no sympathy there. It literally doesn't matter to him. And so to all the people, these fake conservative Christians who champion the voice of God, etc., God is not a God of confusion. He's not going to tell you one thing and me another. He's not going to come out and say, yeah, I think you guys should be separating children at the border. So don't use the word of God in the sweet and comparable name of Jesus, if I can, on this Sunday morning, to say that you are just you're xenophobia and your hatred. We see right through those things. In the same way that you have Americans who will come sometimes to call out people who happen to be Muslim, who commit a terrorist attack, and they say you have to stand up and denounce that, even though you have nothing to do with these people. It's time for us to start calling on these MAGA people. When your people come out and do some obviously racist crap and say obviously racist things and institute racist policies, where you at? We want to hear from you to say that's not what your party represents. And so far, we haven't heard enough.
The United Methodist Church came out and called out Jefferson Sessions, who is a Methodist. I grew up Methodist. The Methodist Church has said, please, don't do this. I don't know if we've heard from him yet. Tiffany Cross, Jason Johnson, Jonathan Capehart, Michelle Bernard, thank you. Up next, finally, some good news. I mean, we've made you wait almost 2 hours for it, but you're going to get it next. The brand new mayor making history in California
is over, and it is time for us to forget about the drama that existed in the world of politics during the campaign, and time for us to focus on addressing these challenges so that we can make our city better for all San Franciscans.
London Breed has become the first black woman to be elected mayor of San Francisco on a platform of building more housing, opening safe injection sites for drug users, and providing more services for those with mental illness. And joining me now from San Francisco is Mayor-elect of San Francisco, London Breed. Well, first of all, sister, congratulations on your victory. It's like we needed this good news in the world so badly, so thank you for making the world a better place.
Thank you, Joy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's show your results. You won. You squeaked it out, 36.70. Someone named Mark Leno came in second. First of all, tell us, you know, from your point of view, what difference will it make to San Francisco to have a black woman as mayor?
I think the biggest difference is that you see so many young kids, especially young girls. They are so excited. They're energized. They want to get actively engaged in politics. They see a real opportunity for themselves in the future of San Francisco, which is so significant. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, and I want to show, so this is Cut 7 for my producers. These were the three headlines that we're seeing out of California this week. You, of course, becoming the first African-American woman to be elected in San Francisco. That's great. A Republican winning a spot in California's governor's race, and the Democrat in the race quickly making Gavin Newsom, quickly making Trump the issue, and an initiative to break California up into 3 states. That's going on the ballot in November. I got to get your take on this idea of breaking up California. Here's a picture of what it would be, the 3 Californias. What do you make of that idea? Because you would then become the mayor of the largest city in Northern California, the state of Northern California.
Well, I'm not a supporter of breaking up California. I like the way it is. I love the way that California is as a state, and I wanted to stay that way. So I will definitely be opposing that particular ballot measure. As far as who I plan to support for governor, of course, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, who was mayor of the city and county of San Francisco, and I will definitely be doing everything I can to get him elected.
I have to get your take on this horrific story that we've been reporting on of children being separated from their parents at the border. Obviously, California, not San Francisco so much, but California immigration is a big issue, very important. Sanctuary cities also being a big issue. The Trump administration vowing to come down hard on cities that are sanctuary cities. I'm not sure if San Francisco is one. What is your take?
Well, San Francisco is a sanctuary city, and we will continue to be a sanctuary city. My goal as mayor is to protect all of the citizens of this city, and that includes our immigrant population. And I think it's really horrible what we know is happening in our country, and how we're talking about young people who never lived in a country that they're being deported to. I think it's horrible, separated from families. We have that problem not just in California, but all over the United States. And it's something that we definitely need to address. And sadly, the Trump administration is focused on just really tearing our country apart by making immigration the kind of issue that it is. But we're talking about people. You know, separating people and calling one population immigrant versus another, it's not the right thing to do. And San Francisco here, we will continue to be an advocate and a strong voice for protecting our city and our immigrant population.
You know, in a lot of ways, California has become the state that's at the forefront of fighting back against the Trump administration, whether it's on issues like climate change or issues like immigration. You know, California obviously is diametrically opposed sort of existentially to everything that Trump represents. Can a state, can a city, can cities and states actually become the way that, you know, vulnerable populations get protected against a federal government that's hostile to them?
I think that they can, because again, here in San Francisco, as a sanctuary city, we have not only protected our immigrant population, but we've put dollars, invested dollars into providing defense for kids that are a part of DACA, you know, and making sure that they have the support necessary in order to remain in San Francisco. We have to be the advocates to work on providing the kinds of solutions, and we also have to be the ones that work on putting someone else in the White House, because I think, sadly, what we have now is someone who continues to be divisive and will continue to focus on making this issue the part of this administration. And so we have to stand strong, we have to stand proud and protect our cities locally, but also push the right policies locally that I think can trickle down to other cities and other states eventually.
London Breed, I think a lot of young women are very proud to see a woman at the helm of the great city of San Francisco, a woman of color. Thank you very much. Congratulations to you.
Thank you, Joy, so much. Thank you.
Thank you. More AM Joy. That is our show for today. Thanks for watching. AM Joy will be back next Saturday, 10 a.m. Eastern. Up next, my friend Alex Witt has the latest, and I want to wish not only your dad, the dads in your life, a happy Father's Day, but my husband, my brother, our EP homie, all of the dads out there. Wonderful, happy Father's Day.
My brother, long distance, he's overseas right now. And how about our studio dad? I mean, Rich.
Studio